The past few days have seemed to mark a turn for the better. On Friday morning, new data showed that the economic fallout from this pandemic may have bottomed out and begun to turn around weeks earlier than had been predicted. Instead of losing millions more jobs in the month of May, our nation had already begun adding back millions of jobs. Lockdowns are easing, businesses are reopening. The greatest country in world history is coming back online, and our citizens are getting their jobs back by the millions. Now, there's no question our national comeback is just beginning. The coronavirus is still with us. We have a long way to go to rebuild and recover from the historic layoffs this spring. But already, even in these early days of our careful reopening, the American people are trouncing the predictions and starting to come back strong. What's more, this weekend saw millions of Americans once again take to the streets and town squares to protest the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black Americans at the hands of law enforcement. But unlike what our nation faced about a week ago, this weekend's demonstrations seem to have been almost entirely peaceful. No more rampant looting, no more police precincts set on fire. By and large, just peaceful protests in our great American tradition. In my home state of Kentucky and Louisville, just like around the nations, hundreds gathered to remember Breonna Taylor on what would have been her 27th birthday and to continue to call for answers. In Lexington, a moment of silence was held at an historic former slave market. Then a group marched to police headquarters. Police officers, including the chief, came out and met them in civil discourse. And while a lot of ink has been spilled recently about our big cities, we cannot miss that this moment is echoing throughout small-town America as well. It was the same story in Benton, in Danville, in Moorhead, all around the Commonwealth and all around the country. Our country has remembered that peace and protest can and must coexist. The vast majority of men and women in law enforcement across our country are not evil, are not racist, do not wake up every morning looking for violence. We're reminded of their bravery every time a citizen needs to dial 911 and they rush toward danger. And we were all reminded again this past weekend as these professionals bravely kept watch over demonstrations, including ones where they themselves have been called racist or evil or denigrated in the worst ways because of their uniform and their badge. So, Mr. President, if peaceful protesters rightly do not want to be lumped in with a subset of looters and rioters who seek destruction, then the vast majority of brave police officers cannot be lumped in with the very worst examples of heinous behavior. It's that simple. But instead, we're already seeing outlandish calls, defund the police or abolish the police, take root within the left-wing leadership class. The president of the city council in Minneapolis has proclaimed she can imagine a future without police. One of her fellow council members put it even more clearly. This council is going to dismantle this police department. To be clear, what this effort is about, one of the local groups informing this push in Minnesota has literally stated that arts programs and mental health resources will be more effective at stopping crime than armed cops. Instead of, quote, dangers armed with guns, they say other professionals like social workers should be the ones to, quote, respond to crises in our community. I'm all for social work and mental health, but call me old-fashioned. I think you may actually want a police officer to stop a criminal. and arrest him before we try to work through his feelings. Well, even if some left-wing leaders fall for this nonsense, I have a feeling the American people are too smart for that. They know that what happened to George Floyd is totally abhorrent. They also know that riots and looting are unacceptable. And they also know that well-trained law enforcement officers are an important part of creating safe communities, not something to defund or abolish. So I'm proud that Americans across the country can protest in safety and peace. I'm proud that their neighbors continue to answer the call to protect and to serve. And I'm hopeful that with unity and mutual respect, we can continue this important national discussion to ensure justice and equal protection under the law. Now, Mr. President, on an entirely different subject, while the Senate remains the only chamber in this Capitol with its lights on, we're going to continue with legislative work for the country. Today, we'll take our first vote to advance the Great American Outdoors Act, a generational bill from Senator Daines and Senator Gardner that will secure the future of our nation's natural treasures. America is home to 419 national park sites, 567 national wildlife refuges, and hundreds of millions of acres of public lands. Every year, millions of Americans turn to these lands for recreation, inspiration, and for their livelihoods. These resources exist because of the visionary actions of prior Congresses. Now it's our turn to secure them for generations yet to come. Our colleagues' legislation does two big things. It improves access to parks and public lands by investing in maintenance and upkeep, and it secures permanent support for the missions of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Their legislation has already persuaded 59 co-sponsors here in the Senate. It's earned the bipartisan endorsement of the last 6 Secretaries of the Interior and a diverse coalition of independent advocates from the Nature Conservancy to the Outdoor Industry Association to the American Battlefield Trust have called on us to pass this bill. This bill has unusually broad bipartisan and vocal support because the issues at hand affect so many different communities so concretely. Every year, visitors to America's national parks bring more than $40 billion in economic impact to the gateway towns that surround them. The state and local parks stewarded by the LWCF help generate another $166 billion in local economic activity and support more than 1.1 million jobs. My fellow Kentuckians and I know this firsthand. At least 120,000 jobs are supported by active outdoor recreation in the Commonwealth, from hunters and anglers in the Daniel Boone National Forest to tourists visiting Mammoth Cave. Our state's natural treasures occasion nearly $13 billion in annual consumer spending. But Kentuckians also know that tight budgets for maintenance often mean that historic sites go without important repairs and upgrades that would ensure safe access and smooth operations. So, we're acutely aware of the need to address the deferred maintenance backlog, which this legislation tackles head on. So I'm very grateful to our colleagues from Montana and Colorado for shepherding this legislation. I'm proud of the stand they've taken in support of our nation's natural wonders and the millions of American livelihoods that depend on them. I look forward to discussing this landmark legislation more in the days ahead, to supporting it here on the floor, and to urging every one of my colleagues to join in.
Order the leadership time.